My mom ruined the best night of my life by announcing she was leaving my dad for my date's father. At my prom. In front of everyone. I had been waiting for Tyler to ask me to prom since sophomore year. He was sweet and funny, and we'd been flirting in chemistry class for months. When he finally asked me in March, I literally couldn't breathe for a few seconds. I said yes so fast he started laughing. The weeks leading up to prom were perfect. I found a beautiful emerald green dress that made me feel like a movie star. My mom offered to take it to get steamed, and for once she actually came through. The day of prom, I spent hours on my hair and makeup, and when I came downstairs, my dad got emotional and said I looked just like my mom did when they first met. Tyler picked me up looking incredible in his suit, and my parents took about 100 photos. My mom hugged him and said she knew his dad from some school committee, and Tyler nodded politely. We escaped to his car, and he told me I looked amazing and that he'd been nervous all day that something would go wrong. Dinner was magical. We talked about everything, our plans for college, our families, our dreams. Tyler wanted to study architecture and design sustainable buildings. I told him I wanted to be a veterinarian, and his whole face lit up. "That's perfect for you," he said. "You're so caring with everyone." Then he got quiet and said, "I really like you. Like, not just as a prom date. I've liked you for a long time." I told him I felt the same way, and he smiled so wide I thought his face might break. When we got to prom, the gym looked incredible with fairy lights and flowers everywhere. We danced to every song, and he introduced me to all his friends and kept his arm around me the whole time. During a slow song, he pulled me close and whispered, "I think this might be the best night of my life." I told him it was mine too. My phone buzzed and I saw it was my mom calling. I stepped away to answer, worried something had happened at home. "Just checking on you, sweetie. Having fun?" I told her everything was perfect and went back to Tyler, relieved it wasn't an emergency. We danced for another hour, and then Tyler asked if I wanted to get some air. We walked out to the courtyard and sat on a bench under the string lights. He held my hand and asked if I wanted to make things official, like actually be his girlfriend over the summer and into college since we were both going to state. I said yes immediately, and he looked so relieved and happy. We were walking back inside when I heard gasps near the entrance. I looked over, and my mom was walking into the prom in jeans and a sweater, mascara running down her face. Right behind her was a man I didn't recognize at first. Then Tyler's hand tightened on mine. "That's my dad," he said, his voice strange. "Why is your mom with my dad?" My mom spotted us and walked straight through the crowd. Everyone had stopped dancing. People were pulling out their phones. She grabbed my hands with shaking fingers and said, "Honey, I'm so sorry to do this here, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I'm leaving your father tonight. I've been seeing Tyler's dad for 6 months, and we're in love. We're driving to Vegas tonight to get married." I heard Tyler make a sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. His dad was standing behind my mom looking uncomfortable but not apologetic. "We wanted you kids to hear it from us," his dad said, before the whole town found out. I looked at Tyler and saw the exact same horror on his face that I felt in my chest. If our parents got married tonight, we would wake up tomorrow as step-siblings. The boy I'd just agreed to date was about to become my family. "Mom," I whispered. "Why here? Why tonight?" She wiped her eyes. "Because I couldn't watch you dance with him knowing what was coming. It felt dishonest. I thought you'd want the truth." I didn't want the truth. I wanted one perfect night before everything fell apart. Tyler dropped my hand and walked away without saying anything. I stood there in my beautiful green dress while 300 people recorded my mother destroying my life. She tried to hug me, and I stepped back. The next morning, my dad moved out. Tyler won't look at me at school. Our parents got married in Vegas just like they planned. And every time someone asks how my prom was, I have to decide whether to lie or explain that my mother announced her affair in front of my entire class and turned my boyfriend into my stepbrother in the span of 5 minutes. She still doesn't understand why I'm upset. "I was being honest with you," she keeps saying. "Isn't that what you always wanted?" No. What I wanted was one night. Just one perfect night before she took everything else. Monday morning, I walked through the school's front doors, and the noise in the hallway just stopped. Everyone turned to look at me like I'd grown a second head or something. Groups of kids who'd been talking and laughing went completely silent and stared as I made my way to my locker. I could feel my face getting hot, and my hands started shaking as I fumbled with my combination lock. Someone's phone was pointed at me from across the hall, and I realized they were recording. My stomach twisted into knots. The videos from prom had clearly made their way around the entire school over the weekend. I heard whispers starting up behind me but couldn't make out the actual words. I grabbed my books and slammed my locker shut harder than I meant to. The metallic bang echoed down the hallway, and more people turned to stare. I kept my eyes on the floor and walked as fast as I could toward my first period class. Every step felt like walking through a minefield where I didn't know when the next explosion would hit. Between first and second period, I saw Tyler at the other end of the hallway near the science labs. Our eyes met for just a second before he turned and walked in the opposite direction like he hadn't seen me at all. My chest felt tight, and I had to stop and lean against the wall for a minute. A girl named Bethany, who I knew was friends with Tyler, came up to me carefully, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. She touched my arm gently and told me Tyler was completely devastated and had no idea how to process what happened. I nodded and told her I understood, because I didn't know how to process it either. Bethany looked relieved that I wasn't mad at her for bringing it up. She said Tyler had been at her house all weekend and barely talked to anyone. Then she squeezed my arm once and walked away to her next class. I stood there watching her go and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. The idea of walking into that cafeteria where everyone would stare and whisper made me feel sick. I walked straight past the lunch line and headed to the counselor's office instead. The secretary looked up when I came in, and her expression changed from professional to sympathetic in about 2 seconds. She told me Mr. McKinney could see me right away and buzzed me through to his office. Samuel McKinney was older, maybe 50 or so, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood up when I walked in and gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. I sat down and he settled back into his own chair and just waited quietly. I realized he wasn't going to make me explain everything because he already knew. The whole staff probably knew by now. That should have made me feel worse, but somehow it was a relief not to have to tell the story again. Mr. McKinney asked how I was holding up, and I told him honestly that I wasn't sure. He nodded like that made perfect sense. We spent the next 40 minutes creating a plan for getting through the last month of school. He gave me permission to eat lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria, and said I could have extensions on any assignments if I needed them. He printed out a pass I could show teachers, so they'd know it was official. Then he leaned forward and said gently that I might want to talk to someone outside of school about the family situation. He gave me a list of therapists in town who worked with teenagers and their families. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket and thanked him. Walking out of his office, I felt like I could actually breathe for the first time all day. When I got home that afternoon, I walked in to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table with Tyler's dad. They had paint samples spread out all over the table in different shades of beige and gray. Mom looked up with this bright smile and said they were picking colors for our new blended family home. Tyler's dad nodded and held up 2 samples, asking which one I liked better. I stared at them both and felt anger rising up in my chest like hot water about to boil over. The casual way they were planning our lives together like nothing had happened made me want to scream. They were acting like we were all just going to move in together and be one big happy family. Like they hadn't destroyed everything at prom in front of 300 people. Like Tyler and I weren't avoiding each other at the school because looking at each other hurt too much. I put my backpack down on the counter and told Mom I was moving in with Aunt Lori until graduation. Mom's smile disappeared and she looked genuinely shocked. She stood up from the table and said I was being dramatic. Tyler's dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair but didn't say anything. Mom walked over to me and said I needed to give their marriage a chance, and that we could all work through this together as a family. I stepped back from her and felt my voice getting louder as I told her she destroyed my relationship with Tyler and humiliated me in front of everyone I know. She was completely missing the point that this wasn't about giving her marriage a chance. This was about her taking away any chance Tyler and I might have had. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her at all. I turned and walked upstairs to start packing. Dad showed up that evening after Mom called him. I heard them arguing downstairs while I pulled clothes out of my dresser and stuffed them into garbage bags. Dad came up to my room looking exhausted and defeated. His shoulders sagged and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He probably hadn't. He sat down on the edge of my bed and watched me pack for a minute without saying anything. Then he told me he was getting an apartment across town and I was welcome there anytime I wanted. But he agreed that Aunt Lori's house made more sense because it was only 10 minutes from the school. He helped me carry bags down to his car while Mom stood in the doorway looking hurt and confused. Tyler's dad had left at some point during the packing. Dad loaded the last bag into his trunk and hugged me tight before we drove to Aunt Lori's. Aunt Lori was waiting on her front porch when we pulled up. She came down the steps and wrapped me in a huge hug that lasted a long time. Dad carried my bags inside while Aunt Lori took me straight to the guest room. She'd already cleared out the closet and put fresh sheets on the bed. She told me this was my space now for as long as I needed it. Then she did something that made me want to cry with relief. She didn't ask a million questions about what happened or tell me how I should feel about any of it. She just squeezed my hand and said she was glad I was there. Dad stayed for a while helping me unpack and then hugged us both goodbye. After he left, Aunt Lori made grilled cheese sandwiches and we ate them while watching some cooking show on TV without talking much. It felt peaceful in a way home hadn't felt in forever. The next afternoon, Elsie showed up at Aunt Lori's house right after school. She had 2 pints of ice cream and a sympathetic smile. We sat on the back porch eating chocolate chip cookie dough straight from the containers. Elsie told me her dad Harold wanted me to know I could talk to him if I wanted. Harold Peterson was a family therapist, and Elsie said he'd helped lots of kids through messy divorces and family stuff. She wasn't pushing me to do it, just letting me know the offer was there. I thought about the list Mr. McKinney had given me, and realized maybe talking to someone who actually understood this kind of thing might help. I asked Elsie if her dad would really be okay with it, and she nodded enthusiastically. She pulled out her phone and texted him right there. He responded within minutes saying he had an opening Wednesday after school if I wanted it. Wednesday afternoon, I sat in Harold's office trying not to feel nervous. His office was in a small building downtown with comfortable chairs and calm colors on the walls. Harold was tall and kind-looking with the same warm smile Elsie had. He asked me to tell him what brought me in, and I explained the whole prom situation. The words came out easier than I expected, maybe because he was a stranger who didn't know my mom or Tyler. When I finished, Harold leaned back in his chair and said what my mom did was a boundary violation. He explained that my feelings of betrayal were completely valid and normal. Hearing him say that made something loosen in my chest. He wasn't telling me to get over it or be understanding or give anyone a chance. He was just confirming that what I felt made sense. We spent the rest of the session talking about ways to protect myself emotionally, while still dealing with family stuff. When I left his office, I felt lighter than I had since prom night. Harold's next session started with him pulling out a small notebook and writing down 3 phrases. He slid it across the desk to me and told me to practice saying them out loud. The first one was simple, but felt powerful when I said it. I need space right now and I'm not ready to discuss this. The second one was harder because it felt mean even though Harold assured me it wasn't. I understand you have feelings about this, but I'm not responsible for managing them. The third one made my throat tight. What you did hurt me deeply, and I need time to process that without pressure from you. Harold explained that Mom would probably push back against these boundaries because she was used to me being accommodating and agreeable. He warned me she might cry or get angry or try to make me feel guilty for setting limits. I asked him what I should do if that happened, and he told me to repeat the phrases calmly, and then end the conversation if she wouldn't respect them. We practiced different scenarios where Mom might try to guilt me into coming home or accepting her marriage. By the end of the session, I felt more prepared but also nervous about actually using these phrases with her. The next morning at the school, I was walking to my locker when I passed 2 girls from my English class standing near the water fountain. They didn't see me coming because they were too focused on their conversation. One of them was saying something about Tyler missing another quiz in history and how worried Bethany was getting about him. The other girl responded that she'd heard he was spending lunch periods in his car instead of the cafeteria, and that his grades were dropping fast. My chest felt tight listening to them talk about how the situation was affecting him. Part of me wanted to text him or find him between classes to see if he was okay. Another part knew that reaching out would just make everything messier and more painful for both of us. I walked past them quickly before they noticed me standing there, and spent the rest of the day trying not to think about Tyler sitting alone in his car, avoiding everyone. Thursday morning, the principal's voice came over the intercom during second period announcing a mandatory assembly for all juniors and seniors during fifth period. Everyone groaned because assemblies usually meant sitting on hard bleachers, listening to boring announcements about parking passes or graduation requirements. When we filed into the gym that afternoon, the principal was standing at a podium with a serious expression that made my stomach drop. She started talking about digital citizenship and social media responsibility, and how permanent online content could be. She mentioned that several parents had contacted the school about inappropriate videos circulating from the school events. Everyone in the gym knew exactly what she was talking about, even though she never said the word prom. I could feel people's eyes sliding toward me and then quickly away when I looked in their direction. My face burned hot and I stared at my shoes while the principal droned on about thinking before posting and respecting people's privacy. The assembly lasted 30 minutes and every second felt like an hour. When it finally ended, Elsie grabbed my arm and pulled me out a side door before anyone could say anything to me. My phone started buzzing constantly that evening with texts from Mom. The first one asked when I was planning to come home because my room was getting dusty and she missed me. The second one said we needed to work through this as a family, and that avoiding each other wasn't healthy. The third one got more desperate, saying she didn't understand why I was being so cold and distant. I stared at the messages for a long time, remembering Harold's boundary phrases. I typed out my response carefully, using almost exactly what he'd taught me. I need space right now and I'm not ready to discuss this. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. Mom's response came back immediately, saying that wasn't fair and that I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings. I took a deep breath and sent another message. I understand you have feelings about this, but I'm not responsible for managing them. I need time. She called me 3 times in a row, but I didn't answer. Finally, she sent one more text saying I was being dramatic and hurtful. I turned off my phone and went to find Aunt Lori, who made me hot chocolate and didn't ask any questions about why I looked upset. Friday afternoon, I stopped by Dad's new apartment to pick up some textbooks I'd left there the week before. I knocked on the door, and Dad answered, looking tired but happy to see me. He let me in, and I headed straight to the spare bedroom where I'd stacked my books on the desk. I was gathering them into my backpack when I heard another knock on the door. Dad opened it, and I heard Tyler's dad's voice in the living room. My whole body went rigid, and I stayed frozen in the bedroom, hoping he would leave quickly. Instead, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. And then Tyler's dad was standing in the doorway looking uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and said he'd been hoping to run into me because he wanted to apologize. His words sounded practiced, like he'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. He told me the timing of the announcement was poor, and that he hoped eventually we could all get along as a family. He said Mom really loved me and wanted to repair our relationship. Every word felt hollow and fake, like he was reading from a script someone else had written for him. I stood up and looked him directly in the eyes. My voice came out steadier than I expected when I told him that he and Mom had taken something special from both me and Tyler, and turned it into a nightmare we would never forget. I said what they did at prom wasn't just bad timing, it was cruel and selfish, and it destroyed something that mattered to both of us. Tyler's dad's face went red, and he started to say something about how they were in love and deserved happiness too. I cut him off and told him I didn't care about his justifications and that I needed him to leave. He looked shocked, like nobody had ever spoken to him that way before. He mumbled something about hoping I'd understand someday, and then left quickly without saying goodbye to Dad. After he was gone, I sat on the bed shaking with adrenaline. Dad came in and hugged me tight and said he was proud of me for standing up for myself. The small sense of satisfaction I felt from making Tyler's dad uncomfortable lasted the rest of the evening. Saturday morning, Elsie showed up at Aunt Lori's house with a determined look on her face. She announced that we were going to the end-of-year art show at the school whether I liked it or not. I tried to argue that I wasn't ready to face everyone, but Elsie wasn't having it. She said hiding forever wasn't a real option, and that I needed to prove to myself I could walk through those hallways with my head up. Aunt Lori backed her up, saying sometimes the only way past fear was straight through it. I finally agreed and changed into clean jeans and a sweater that didn't look like I'd given up on life. The art show was in the main hallway and cafeteria with student paintings and sculptures displayed on tables and walls. When we walked in, I could feel the stares immediately. People's conversations dropped to whispers when they saw me, and some of them didn't even bother being subtle about pointing. Elsie stayed right next to me the whole time, acting completely normal, like nothing was wrong. We looked at paintings and ceramics projects, and she made comments about which ones she liked best. I kept my shoulders back and my chin up, even though my hands were shaking in my pockets. We were standing near a large abstract painting when I noticed Tyler on the other side of the display. He was looking at the same artwork from his angle, and our eyes met accidentally across the space. For just a second, I saw everything I was feeling reflected back at me in his expression. The hurt and anger and confusion were all there, written clearly on his face. We both recognized the pain in each other, and it felt like being punched in the stomach all over again. Then Tyler looked away quickly and moved to a different section of the show. I turned and walked in the opposite direction with Elsie following close behind. Neither of us said anything about it, but my chest felt tight for the rest of the afternoon. Monday evening, I had a video call scheduled with the college housing coordinator to finalize my dorm assignment for fall semester. I set up my laptop at Aunt Lori's kitchen table and joined the call right on time. The coordinator was a friendly woman who started by asking basic questions about my preferences for roommate matching. Everything was going smoothly until she asked about my family situation for emergency contact information. She needed to know who to call if something happened to me on campus. The question hit me harder than I expected, and suddenly I was crying in front of this stranger, trying to explain that my mom had married my prom date's father, and I didn't want her listed as my primary contact. The words came out jumbled and messy between sobs. I told her about prom night and the announcement and how Tyler was supposed to be my boyfriend, but now he was technically my stepbrother. The coordinator's face shifted from professional politeness to genuine sympathy. She let me cry for a minute before gently saying she understood, and that family situations could be complicated. She pulled up my paperwork on her screen and asked if I had other family members I'd prefer to list instead. I gave her Aunt Lori's information and Dad's new address and phone number. The coordinator made notes in her system and assured me that Mom wouldn't be contacted unless absolutely necessary, and only after trying my other contacts first. Then she mentioned something that made me feel slightly better. She said the university had counseling services available to all students free of charge, and that lots of people use them to deal with family stress and life transitions. She sent me a link to the counseling center website and suggested I might want to book an appointment early in the semester before things got too busy. By the end of the call, I felt drained, but also relieved that at least one part of my life was getting organized in a way that felt safe. Tuesday morning, I walked into the auditorium for graduation practice and spotted Tyler immediately. He was standing near the stage with a group of guys from his dorm floor, laughing at something someone said. The second he saw me, his smile dropped and he looked away fast. I found a seat in the back row and pulled out my phone to look busy. The graduation coordinator started calling out names alphabetically to practice our lineup. When she got to the S section, Tyler and I ended up standing about 6 people apart in line. I could feel the space between us like something physical. The other seniors around us kept glancing back and forth between Tyler and me with curious looks on their faces. Nobody said anything, but the awkwardness hung in the air thick enough to choke on. We ran through the ceremony twice, and both times Tyler kept his eyes forward and his shoulders stiff. During the break between run-throughs, I went to the bathroom just to escape the weird tension. When I came back, Elsie had saved me a different seat farther from where Tyler was sitting. Practice ended, and everyone filed out talking about graduation parties and summer plans. Tyler left through the side door without looking back once. Wednesday afternoon, I was reading on the couch at Aunt Lori's when someone knocked hard on the front door. Aunt Lori opened it, and I heard Mom's voice saying she needed to talk to me about graduation. My stomach dropped. Aunt Lori stepped outside and closed the door behind her, and I could hear them talking in low voices on the porch. After a minute, Aunt Lori came back in alone and told me Mom wanted to discuss who would be sitting where at the ceremony. I walked to the door and opened it. Mom was standing on the porch with her purse clutched in both hands. She started talking fast about how she and Tyler's dad wanted to sit together as a family, and she hoped I would be okay with that. I took a breath and used one of Harold's phrases. I told her I would let her know my decisions about graduation, but I wasn't discussing them right now. Mom's face went red and she said we needed to figure this out together. Aunt Lori stepped up beside me and said I had made myself clear, and Mom needed to respect that. Mom looked between us like she couldn't believe what was happening. She opened her mouth to argue, but Aunt Lori just smiled politely and said, Maybe they could talk another time when everyone was calmer. Mom turned and walked back to her car without saying goodbye. Thursday evening, Dad picked me up and took me to the Italian restaurant we used to go to for special occasions. We ordered pasta, and he asked how I was holding up with graduation coming so fast. I told him I was managing, but everything felt weird and complicated. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He said he was really proud of how I was handling everything, and that took a lot of strength. Then his expression changed and got more serious. He told me the divorce was getting messy because Mom wanted to rush everything through as fast as possible. She was pushing for a quick settlement so she could fully move on with her new life. Dad said he was trying to make sure the financial stuff was fair and that he got what he was entitled to after 20 years of marriage. He looked tired when he said it, and I realized he probably wasn't sleeping much. I asked if he had a good lawyer, and he nodded and said yes, but the whole process was draining. We finished dinner, and he drove me back to Aunt Laurie's. Before I got out of the car, he hugged me tight and said we would get through this together. Friday morning at breakfast, I asked Dad something I had been wondering about for weeks. I wanted to know if he had any idea about the affair before prom night. Dad set down his coffee cup and looked out the window for a long moment. Finally, he said he suspected something was off in the months before prom. Mom had been distant and distracted, and she kept finding reasons to be out of the house for school committee meetings that seemed to run really late. He said he never imagined it was an affair, and definitely never thought it was with Tyler's dad. When he looked back at me, his eyes were so sad it made my chest hurt. I realized Dad was dealing with his own heartbreak while trying to be strong and supportive for me. He had lost his wife and his marriage and probably felt just as betrayed and confused as I did. I told him I was sorry he was going through this too, and he gave me a sad smile. He said we were both going through it and at least we had each other. Monday afternoon, I was in the library working on a final paper when Bethany walked up to my table. She sat down across from me and kept her voice low. She said Tyler had asked her to tell me something. My heart started beating faster, and I closed my laptop to focus on what she was saying. Bethany explained that Tyler was really sorry for avoiding me and acting like I didn't exist. She said he had been dealing with a lot of anger at his dad, and he didn't know how to separate that from the whole situation with me. Tyler felt guilty about how everything went down, and he knew it wasn't my fault any more than it was his. Bethany looked uncomfortable delivering the message, but she kept going. She said Tyler was seeing a therapist now to work through his feelings about his dad's choices. He wanted me to know he didn't blame me for anything, and he hoped I was doing okay. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for weeks. I told Bethany to let Tyler know I understood completely, and I didn't blame him for any of this either. She looked relieved, like she had been worried I would be angry. Then she mentioned something else almost casually. She said Tyler had decided to room with some friends from his dorm floor at State instead of doing the random roommate assignment. My stomach dropped because I knew what that meant. Tyler and I had talked about rooming near each other at State back when we thought we were going to be dating. We had looked at the housing options together and made plans about which dining halls we would eat at and which classes we might take together. Now he was actively changing those plans to make sure we wouldn't run into each other on campus. Bethany must have seen something on my face because she quickly said she was sure it wasn't personal. But we both knew it was personal even if Tyler didn't mean it to hurt me. After Bethany left, I sat in the library for another hour, not really working on my paper. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The full weight of what our parents had done hit me all over again. Tyler and I were supposed to be starting college together as a couple excited about our future. Instead, we were making housing decisions specifically to avoid each other because our parents had destroyed any chance we had at being together. We hadn't done anything wrong, but we were the ones paying the price for their choices. All the plans we had made that perfect night at prom before everything fell apart were gone now. Tyler had to rearrange his entire college experience to cope with family drama he never asked for. I had to do the same thing. We were both just trying to survive something neither of us created or wanted. Wednesday afternoon, I had another session with Harold at his office, and I told him about Tyler's message through Bethany and about finding out he changed his housing plans at State. Harold listened carefully and then asked me how that made me feel. I told him it felt like losing Tyler all over again. First, I lost the chance to date him, and now I was losing the future I had imagined where we would be together at college. Harold nodded and said what I was feeling was grief. He explained that I wasn't just mourning the end of a romantic relationship, but also the loss of a specific future I had been looking forward to. All those plans and dreams I had built up in my head were gone now, and it was okay to be sad about that. He reminded me that I was allowed to mourn what could have been while also moving forward with my life. The two things weren't opposites. I could be sad about what I lost and still build a good future for myself. It helped to hear him say that out loud. Senior week started on Monday with a bunch of activities planned by the class officers. Elsie stuck right next to me through all of them like she was my personal bodyguard. We went to the senior breakfast and the carnival day and the class picnic. Every single event, someone came up and asked invasive questions about prom night or my family situation. People wanted to know if my mom was really married to Tyler's dad now and if Tyler and I were actually step-siblings. Some of them pretended to be concerned, but I could tell they just wanted gossip to share with their friends. Elsie got really good at running interference. Whenever someone started asking questions, she would jump in and change the subject smoothly. She would bring up college plans or summer jobs or literally anything else to redirect the conversation. By the end of the week, I was exhausted from all the fake sympathy and nosy questions, but at least I had made it through without breaking down in public. Friday night, I sat down at Aunt Lori's kitchen table with a notebook and started writing a letter to Mom. Harold had suggested it might help since Mom didn't seem to hear me when we talked face to face. I wanted to explain exactly how her actions had affected me in a way she couldn't interrupt or dismiss. I spent hours getting every word right. I wrote about the humiliation of having her announce her affair in front of 300 people at my prom. I described how it felt to watch videos of that moment circulating around school and knowing everyone had witnessed my worst nightmare. I explained that she hadn't just ended her marriage that night, but had also destroyed my relationship with Tyler and turned my perfect evening into something I would never be able to remember without pain. I detailed the betrayal I felt knowing she had been lying to me and Dad for 6 months while planning her new life. I told her about moving out and staying with Aunt Lori because I couldn't watch her play house with Tyler's dad. By the time I finished writing, my hand was cramping and my eyes were burning, but I had finally said everything I needed to say. I folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house when I knew she would be home alone. Tyler's dad's car wasn't in the driveway, which made it easier. I knocked on the door and Mom answered, looking surprised to see me. She invited me in, but I stayed on the porch and handed her the envelope. I told her to read it when she had time and that I needed her to really think about what I wrote. She started to open it right there, but I turned and walked back to my car before she could say anything. 2 hours later, my phone rang with Mom's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was shaky and I could tell she had been crying. She said she read my letter 3 times and she never meant to hurt me the way she did. She kept apologizing over and over and saying she wished she could take back how she handled everything. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. She told me she understood I was upset, but she deserved to be happy too, and that sometimes happiness required hard choices. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar frustration building in my chest. She still didn't get it. Her happiness had cost me everything, and she was treating it like some kind of fair trade. I took a deep breath and used one of Harold's boundary phrases. I told Mom I would attend graduation and be civil at family events, but I needed her to stop pushing me to have a relationship with Tyler's dad. I said I needed her to stop pretending we were one big happy family when we clearly weren't. She was quiet for a long time and then she said okay, in a small voice. She agreed to give me space and respect my boundaries. It wasn't the full understanding I wanted, but it was something. Graduation rehearsal was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the auditorium. I walked in with Elsie and immediately saw Tyler sitting in the 3rd row. The student organizer was assigning seats alphabetically, and of course our last names put us near each other. I sat down 2 seats away from him and stared straight ahead. The rehearsal coordinator went through the whole ceremony process explaining when we would walk and where we would sit. When she had us practice walking across the stage, Tyler and I ended up in line close together. We stood there awkwardly for a few minutes while other students got their instructions. Finally, Tyler cleared his throat and said my name quietly. I looked at him and saw he looked as uncomfortable as I felt. He said this whole situation wasn't fair to either of us. I nodded and told him I knew that. We both acknowledged that our parents had made choices that destroyed something good between us. It felt strange to be talking to him after weeks of careful avoidance. He looked down at his shoes and then back at me. He told me he was sorry my mom put me through everything at prom. I felt something loosen in my chest, and I told him I was sorry his dad did the same to him. We stood there looking at each other, and I saw the same hurt in his eyes that I felt every day. It was the first real conversation we had since that horrible night, and it felt both healing and heartbreaking at the same time. The coordinator called us forward to practice walking, and the moment ended. We went through our lines and got our diplomas, and then rehearsal was over. Tyler gave me a small nod as we left, and I nodded back. Graduation day arrived on Saturday morning. I woke up at Aunt Lori's house and got ready carefully. Dad picked me up and we drove to the school together. He told me how proud he was of me for making it through the hardest month of my life. Elsie met us in the parking lot and we walked into the building together. I had specifically requested that Mom and Tyler's dad sit on the opposite side of the auditorium from Dad and Aunt Lori. When I walked into the staging area, I saw Mom across the room. She waved at me and I waved back but didn't go over. Tyler's dad was standing next to her and I looked away. The ceremony started and we filed into the auditorium in our caps and gowns. I could see Dad and Aunt Lori and Elsie sitting together in the middle section. Mom and Tyler's dad were on the far left just like I requested. They had actually respected my boundary, which felt like a small victory. The principal gave a speech about our futures and achievements. The valedictorian talked about overcoming challenges. I barely heard any of it because I was focused on getting through this day. Finally, they started calling names alphabetically. When they called mine, I stood up and walked across the stage. The diploma was heavy in my hands and I looked out at the crowd. The applause from Dad's section was loud and I could see Aunt Lori standing up clapping. I felt a surge of real pride that I had made it through the worst month of my life without completely falling apart. I had survived prom night and the aftermath, and here I was graduating. I walked off the stage and sat back down feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Aunt Lori threw a graduation party for me at her house that afternoon. She had decorated the backyard with balloons and set up tables with food. Dad arrived first and helped set everything up. Elsie came with her whole family, including Harold, who gave me a hug and told me he was proud of my progress. More people showed up, including some of my other friends from the school, and Dad's sister and her kids. Everyone there actually cared about me and had supported me through Mom's choices. It felt good to be surrounded by people who understood what I had been through. Dad made a toast about resilience and how proud he was of the person I was becoming. Elsie's mom brought a huge cake and everyone sang. I looked around at all these people who had shown up for me and felt genuinely happy for the first time since prom. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom asking if she could stop by the party. I looked at the message for a minute and then typed back that today was for the people who supported me through her choices. It felt harsh typing it, but Harold had told me that setting firm boundaries was important for my healing. She didn't respond, and I put my phone away. The party went on for hours, and I laughed and ate cake and felt normal. That night, I was scrolling through social media in bed when I saw Tyler had posted a photo from his own graduation party. He was smiling in the picture surrounded by his friends. We were both having separate celebrations with the people who cared about us. I looked at his genuine smile in the photo, and then thought about how I had smiled at my party too. Maybe we were both starting to find our way forward despite everything our parents had done. It didn't fix what happened, but it felt like maybe we could both survive this and be okay eventually. I liked the photo and then closed the app. Summer arrived hot and sticky. I needed to stay busy, so I applied for jobs and got hired at a local veterinary clinic as a kennel assistant. The work was mostly cleaning cages and feeding animals, but I loved being around the dogs and cats. Working with animals felt good after months of dealing with complicated human emotions. My first day, the head vet doctor, Burke, showed me around and explained my duties. She was patient and kind and didn't ask about my personal life. I spent my days taking care of the animals, and it kept my mind occupied. The dogs were always happy to see me, and the cats didn't care about my family drama. It was exactly what I needed. I spent the next few weeks getting comfortable at the clinic and learning the routines. Doctor Burke started letting me observe her during appointments after I'd been there about a month. She'd call me into the exam rooms and explain what she was checking for while she examined the animals. I watched her calm down nervous dogs and handle scared cats with patience. She showed me how to listen to a dog's heart and lungs and taught me the signs of common health problems. Between appointments, she'd quiz me on animal anatomy and explain why certain treatments worked. I soaked up everything she taught me and took notes in a little notebook I kept in my scrubs pocket. One afternoon, she finished examining a golden retriever puppy and turned to me while the owner was paying at the front desk. She said she could tell I had a real gift for working with animals and asked if I'd thought about my college plans. I told her I'd been accepted to state and wanted to study veterinary medicine. Her whole face lit up, and she told me that was wonderful news. Then she offered to let me shadow her during more complex appointments and procedures, so I could get real experience before starting college. I felt this rush of excitement because getting hands-on experience at an actual clinic was exactly what I needed. Dr. Burke became a mentor over those summer weeks, and I started seeing what my future career could actually look like. Dad called me one evening while I was at Aunt Laurie's house doing laundry. He sounded different on the phone, less tired than he'd been sounding lately. He asked if I could meet him for dinner the next day because he had some news to share. I felt nervous wondering what it could be, but agreed to meet him at our favorite diner. The next evening, I slid into the booth across from him, and he ordered us both burgers and fries like we used to do before everything fell apart. He waited until the food arrived and then told me his divorce lawyer had called with an update. Apparently, Mom's rushed remarriage to Tyler's dad was actually helping Dad's case for a better settlement. The lawyer explained that the quick Vegas wedding proved the affair had been going on and showed that Mom had been planning to leave for a while. This meant Dad could argue for a more favorable division of assets, and possibly even get some of the retirement money Mom had wanted to keep. I felt this weird mix of emotions hearing the news. Part of me felt bad that Mom's impulsive choice was backfiring on her, but another part of me felt a grim satisfaction knowing her actions had consequences beyond just destroying my prom night and my relationship with Tyler. Dad said he wasn't trying to be vindictive, but he wanted to make sure he was treated fairly after everything that happened. I told him I understood, and that I was glad he was standing up for himself. We finished our burgers and talked about other things, but I kept thinking about how Mom's inability to wait or plan ahead had hurt her in ways she probably never considered. I was getting coffee at the local shop a few days later when I spotted Bethany sitting at a corner table with her laptop. She looked up and waved me over before I could decide whether to approach. I sat down across from her and we made awkward small talk for a minute about summer jobs and college prep. Then she brought up Tyler without me having to ask. She told me he was doing better now that he had a job at a landscaping company and was staying busy preparing for college. She said the physical work seemed to help him process everything that happened. Then she mentioned something that surprised me. She said Tyler had started seeing a therapist to work through his feelings about his dad's affair and the whole prom situation. I felt genuinely glad hearing that because I knew from my sessions with Harold how much therapy had helped me. Bethany said Tyler was still angry at his dad, but he was learning to separate that anger from other parts of his life. She told me he'd decided to room with friends at State instead of doing random roommate assignment because he wanted to start college with people who already knew his situation and wouldn't judge him. I understood that completely since I'd been dreading the possibility of having to explain everything to a stranger. Bethany finished her coffee and said she thought Tyler and I might eventually be able to be friendly again once enough time passed. I wasn't sure about that, but I appreciated her trying to help us both heal. We said goodbye, and I walked back to my car feeling oddly hopeful that maybe Tyler was finding his way through this mess just like I was. That evening, Aunt Lori asked me to sit with her in the living room after dinner. She had this serious look on her face that made me worried something was wrong. But then she smiled and told me she wanted to talk about my plans for college breaks and holidays. She said she'd been watching how I handled everything since prom night, and she was proud of the maturity I'd shown in dealing with such a difficult situation. She told me a lot of kids my age would have fallen apart completely, but I'd found ways to cope and keep moving forward. Her words made me feel emotional because I hadn't felt particularly mature or strong most days. Then she said something that really meant a lot to me. She told me I was welcome to stay with her during college breaks and holidays if I didn't want to navigate the awkwardness of being at Mom's house with Tyler's dad there. She said her guest room would always be my room, and I could come back anytime I needed a safe space away from the complicated family dynamics. I thanked her and felt tears starting because having that option took away so much stress about future visits home. I'd been dreading Thanksgiving and Christmas, knowing I'd have to choose between staying with Dad in his small apartment or going to Mom's house where everything would be weird and tense. Now I had a third option that felt comfortable and safe. Aunt Lori hugged me and said family wasn't just about blood relations. It was about the people who showed up for you when things got hard. I met with Harold one last time before college started in late August. We sat in his office and he reviewed all the progress I'd made since that first session back in May. He reminded me of how overwhelmed and hurt I'd been initially, and how I'd learned to set boundaries with Mom and communicate my needs more clearly. He said I'd developed healthy coping strategies for dealing with difficult emotions, and I'd shown real growth in advocating for myself. I felt proud hearing him list out everything I'd accomplished, because it helped me see how far I'd actually come. Then Harold talked about the transition to college, and how I might face new challenges being away from my support system. He reminded me that the university had counseling services available to all students, and encouraged me to reach out if I ever felt overwhelmed or needed someone to talk to. He wrote down the contact information for the campus counseling center, and made me promise I'd keep it somewhere safe. We talked about how to handle running into Tyler on campus and how to maintain my boundaries with Mom even when we weren't living in the same town. Harold said the skills I'd learned over the summer would serve me well, but I shouldn't hesitate to ask for help if I needed it. We shook hands at the end of the session, and he told me he believed I was going to do great things. Walking out of his office for the last time felt bittersweet because he'd helped me so much, but I also felt ready to move forward on my own. Mom texted me a few days later asking if we could meet for coffee. I stared at the message for a while, trying to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I remembered what Harold had said about maintaining communication, even when setting boundaries. I texted back that I'd meet her at a neutral coffee shop on Saturday morning. When I arrived, she was already there looking nervous and fidgeting with her cup. I sat down across from her and waited for her to start talking. She seemed different this time, less defensive and more willing to actually listen. She apologized again for the prom announcement and said she'd been thinking a lot about what I'd written in my letter. Then she did something she hadn't really done before. She asked me to explain how I felt about the public nature of her announcement and why that made everything so much worse. I took a deep breath and told her that having 300 people record the worst moment of my life made it impossible to process privately or move past it. I explained that videos of that night were still circulating online, and people I barely knew had opinions about my family situation. I told her that turning my potential boyfriend into my stepbrother in front of everyone I knew felt like she'd prioritized her own need to be honest over my need to have one good night. Mom listened without interrupting, and I could see tears in her eyes. She said she'd been so focused on her own guilt about the affair that she hadn't fully understood how the public setting multiplied my hurt and humiliation. We sat there for a while longer, and I could tell Mom was really trying to understand this time instead of just defending herself. I told her I wasn't ready to forgive her completely for what she did, and I might never be okay with how she handled everything. But I also said I was willing to work toward having a better relationship if she could respect my boundaries and stop expecting me to embrace her new marriage or pretend Tyler's dad was family to me. I explained that I needed her to acknowledge the damage she caused and give me space to heal on my own timeline. Mom nodded and wiped her eyes with a napkin. She said she understood, and she wouldn't push me to spend time at her house or include Tyler's dad in our interactions unless I initiated it. She promised to respect my boundaries and work on rebuilding trust slowly, instead of expecting everything to go back to normal right away. I could see she was genuinely trying, even though it was hard for her to accept that her choices had lasting consequences. We finished our coffee and hugged briefly before leaving. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it felt like maybe we'd found a starting point for something healthier. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter knowing Mom finally seemed to understand the gravity of what she'd done to me. The week before I left for college, Dad came over to Aunt Lori's house to help me pack. We spent the afternoon sorting through my clothes and supplies and loading boxes into his truck. While we worked, he started talking about everything that had happened since prom night. He said watching me handle this situation had taught him something important about me as a person. He told me I'd learned to advocate for myself and recognize when people weren't respecting my needs, even when those people were family members I loved. Dad said those were valuable life skills that would serve me well in college and beyond. I told him I wished I'd learned them in a different way, without all the pain and public humiliation. He nodded and said he wished that too, but sometimes the hardest experiences taught the most important lessons. We talked about how I'd stood up to Mom and set boundaries, how I'd sought help from Harold when I needed it, and how I'd built a support system with people who actually cared about my well-being. Dad said he was proud of the person I was becoming, and he knew I'd do great things at State. We finished packing and ordered pizza for dinner. Sitting there with Dad and Aunt Lori eating pizza and talking about my future, I felt grateful for the people who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. The night before I left for State, Elsie came over for a sleepover like we used to have in middle school. We spread out sleeping bags in Aunt Lori's living room and stayed up late talking about everything. Elsie was heading to a different university across the state, so we wouldn't see each other as much once school started. We talked about our hopes for college and what we were nervous about. She told me she was worried about making new friends and finding her way around a huge campus. I admitted I was scared about running into Tyler and having to navigate that awkwardness while also trying to start fresh. Elsie made me promise to text her immediately if I ever saw Tyler on campus, so she could help me process it. We talked about our planned majors and the classes we were excited about taking. She asked about my work at the vet clinic, and I told her how much I'd learned from Dr. Burke over the summer. We made plans to video chat every week and visit each other during breaks. Around 2 in the morning, we finally started getting tired. Elsie turned to me in the dark and said she was proud of me for surviving everything that happened and still moving forward with my plans. I told her I couldn't have done it without her support and her dad's help. We fell asleep talking about all the adventures we'd have in college and promising to stay close even though we'd be far apart. Move-in day at State arrived hot and humid in late August. Dad and Aunt Lori both came to help me carry boxes up to my dorm room on the 3rd floor. The building was complete chaos with families everywhere hauling furniture and crying parents saying goodbye to their kids. My roommate was already there when we arrived, a girl named Jessica who seemed friendly and normal. She was unpacking clothes and decorating her side of the room with photos and posters. We introduced ourselves and made small talk while Dad and Aunt Lori helped me set up my bed and desk. Jessica asked basic questions about where I was from and what I planned to study, but she didn't pry into my personal life or ask about my family. I felt this huge sense of relief knowing she had no idea about the prom incident or my complicated family situation. Here at State, I could be just another freshman starting college, not the girl whose mom destroyed her prom night in front of everyone. After we finished unpacking, Dad and Aunt Lori took me and Jessica out for lunch at a campus restaurant. We talked about class schedules and campus resources, and everything felt normal and exciting. When it was time for them to leave, Dad hugged me tight and told me to call him anytime I needed anything. Aunt Lori reminded me that her house was always open if I needed to come home. I walked them to Dad's truck and waved as they drove away. Standing there on campus watching them leave, I felt scared and excited and hopeful all at once about this fresh start, where not everyone knew my story. The first week of classes, I found a flyer for the pre-vet club meeting on a bulletin board outside the science building. I showed up on Wednesday evening to a classroom full of students who actually wanted to talk about animal medicine instead of my family drama. A girl named Rachel sat next to me and started telling me about her volunteer work at a wildlife rehabilitation center. Another student was planning to specialize in large animal medicine and work with horses. I listened to everyone share their goals and felt something shift inside me. For the first time since prom night, I was in a space where I was just another student with dreams about helping animals. Nobody here knew about the videos or the scandal or any of it. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I said I wanted to be a veterinarian and had worked at a clinic over the summer. Rachel asked which clinic, and we ended up talking for 20 minutes after the meeting about different veterinary specialties. Walking back to my dorm, I realized I'd gone almost 2 hours without thinking about Tyler or my mom or that horrible night. I was crossing the main quad in mid-September when I saw him. Tyler was walking with a group of guys about 50 feet away, laughing at something one of them said. My whole body went rigid and I stopped moving. He looked up at the same moment and our eyes met across the grass. For a few seconds, we both just stood there frozen while students walked between us. Then he gave me a small nod. Just a quick acknowledgement that we'd seen each other. I nodded back and kept walking in my original direction. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't the awful, crushing feeling I'd expected. It was more like closing a door that had been left open. We'd seen each other and survived it, and the world didn't end. Biology lab became my favorite part of the week. I was good at the precise work of preparing slides and documenting observations. My lab partner was quiet and focused, which meant we got our work done efficiently. The professor, a woman named Dr. Lawson, walked around checking everyone's progress during our 3rd lab session. She stopped at our station and looked at my slide preparation and notes. She told me I had excellent attention to detail and asked if I'd considered getting involved in undergraduate research. I said I didn't know that was an option for freshmen. Dr. Lawson wrote down her office hours on a piece of paper and told me to stop by if I was interested in learning more about research opportunities in the biology department. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my backpack. Someone thought I was good at something. Someone saw potential in me that had nothing to do with being the girl from the prom disaster. Mom started calling every Sunday afternoon like clockwork. The first few calls were awkward with long silences and careful topic avoidance. But after a few weeks, we found a rhythm. She asked about my classes, and I told her about biology lab and the pre-vet club. I asked about her job, and she talked about work projects. Neither of us mentioned Tyler's dad unless I brought it up first, which I mostly didn't. It wasn't the close relationship we'd had before prom, but it was something I could manage. She seemed to understand that I needed things to stay surface level for now. During our fourth call, she asked if I'd be coming home for fall break, and I told her I was planning to stay with Dad. There was a pause, and then she said, "Okay," in a small voice. I almost felt bad, but then I remembered standing in that gym in my green dress, and the feeling passed. A flyer in the student center advertised a support group for students dealing with family transitions. I walked past it 3 times before finally taking a photo of the meeting information. The first session I attended was in a conference room in the counseling building. About 8 other students sat in a circle with a counselor who introduced herself and explained the group format. We went around sharing why we were there. One girl's parents had divorced over the summer. A guy's dad had come out and left his mom. Another student's mom had remarried someone with kids, and the blended family was a disaster. When it was my turn, I said my mom had an affair and married my prom date's dad, making us step-siblings. A few people's eyes widened, but nobody looked at me like I was a circus attraction. The counselor thanked me for sharing and moved on to the next person. Hearing everyone else's stories made me realize I wasn't uniquely cursed. Lots of people had parents who made choices that messed up their kids' lives. We were all just trying to figure out how to deal with it. Fall break arrived in October, and I took a bus to Dad's new apartment instead of going back to the house where Mom lived with Tyler's dad. Dad had rented a small 2-bedroom place across town with basic furniture and hardly any decorations. He seemed embarrassed about how empty it looked, but I told him it was perfect. We went grocery shopping together and made spaghetti for dinner. Dad asked about school, and I told him about Dr. Lawson's research opportunity offer and the pre-vet club. He looked proud and said he always knew I'd do great things. We watched old movies on his couch, and I fell asleep during the second one. When I woke up, there was a blanket over me, and Dad was reading in the chair across the room. The apartment was quiet and calm, and nobody was pretending to be a happy blended family. It felt more like home than anywhere had felt in months. The library became my main study spot as midterms approached. I was there on a Tuesday evening in November working on a biology paper when someone sat down at the table across from me. I looked up, and Tyler was there with his backpack and a textbook. We both froze for a second. Then he asked if this seat was taken. I shook my head. We studied in silence for maybe 10 minutes before he spoke again. He asked how my classes were going. I told him they were going well and asked him the same question. He said architecture studio was intense, but he really liked it. We talked for a few minutes about adjusting to college and how different it was from high school. His voice was careful, and so was mine. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. Just 2 people who used to know each other trying to be normal. Tyler mentioned he'd made good friends in his dorm and seemed to be settling in okay. Then he said he hoped I was doing well too. I told him I was and realized I actually meant it. For the first time since that awful night at prom, I could honestly say I was doing okay. He nodded like he understood and went back to his textbook. We studied at the same table for another hour without talking much. When I packed up to leave, he said it was good to see me. I said the same thing back. Walking out of the library, I felt lighter somehow, like we'd both been carrying something heavy and had finally been able to set it down. Finals week hit in early December, and I spent long hours in the library and my dorm room studying. My biology final was comprehensive and covered everything from the entire semester. I made flashcards and diagrams and reviewed all my lab notes. The night before the exam, I felt nervous but also confident. I'd worked hard all semester and my grades reflected it. Jessica commented that I seemed really focused and driven compared to a lot of other freshmen. I told her I'd had a rough summer and college felt like a fresh start where I could control my own success. The biology final went well, and so did my other exams. When grades posted before winter break, I had a solid GPA and felt genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. I'd built a life here at State that belonged entirely to me. Not the girl whose mom ruined her prom. Not Tyler's almost stepsister. Just me, working toward my dreams of becoming a veterinarian and doing well at it. An email appeared in my inbox a few days before I was supposed to head to Dad's for winter break. The sender was Dr. Burke from the clinic back home. She said she'd heard from my dad that I was doing well at State and studying pre-vet. She wrote that she'd love to have me back next summer if I was interested, and that she might have a research project involving canine rehabilitation that I could help with. She said she'd been impressed with my work ethic and natural ability with animals during the summer. Having someone believe in my abilities like that felt incredible. I read the email 3 times and then called Dad to tell him. He sounded happy and said, "Doctor." Burke had asked him for my email address a few days earlier. I wrote back to Dr. Burke right away saying I'd love to work with her again and learn more about the research project. For the first time in months, I felt excited about going home, not because of the town itself, but because I had something meaningful to return to that I'd earned through my own hard work. Christmas break arrived, and I packed my car with enough clothes for 2 weeks split between different houses. Dad had told me I was welcome to stay with him the whole time, and Aunt Lori said the same thing. Mom had texted asking about my plans, and I'd used the boundary phrases Harold taught me to explain I'd see her for a few hours, but needed space to process everything that had happened. She replied with a sad face emoji, but said she understood. The drive home from state took 3 hours, and I spent most of it listening to music and thinking about how different this break felt from the summer. Back then, I was raw and angry and couldn't imagine feeling normal again. Now I had routines and friends and good grades and a sense of control over my own life that nobody could take away from me. I pulled into Dad's apartment complex first, and he came out to help me carry my bags inside. His place was small but cozy with furniture he'd picked out himself and photos of us on the walls. We ordered pizza and watched a movie, and he asked about my classes without bringing up Mom or the divorce or any of the heavy stuff. It felt peaceful in a way home hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house to drop off some mail she'd asked me to bring and pick up a few things I'd left behind. Tyler's dad answered the door, and we had an awkward moment of eye contact before he stepped aside to let me in. Mom appeared from the kitchen looking nervous and asked if I wanted coffee. I told her I could only stay for a few minutes, and she nodded like she'd expected that answer. We sat at the kitchen table, and she asked about school and my classes and whether I'd made friends. I gave her basic answers and watched her try to fill the silence with questions that didn't touch on anything real. When I stood up to leave, she asked if I'd come back for dinner before I left town, and I said maybe, which we both knew meant probably not. She hugged me at the door and whispered that she loved me, and I said it back because it was true, even though everything else was complicated. Driving back to Dad's apartment, I felt okay about how I'd handled it. I'd shown up and been civil and maintained my boundaries without being cruel. Harold would have been proud of the way I'd managed the situation with the tools he'd taught me. Elsie texted me the day after Christmas asking if I wanted to meet up at the coffee shop downtown. I said yes immediately because I'd missed her and wanted to catch up properly without just texting. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual table by the window with 2 hot chocolates waiting. We hugged and she told me I looked good, like college was treating me well. I said it was, and asked about her classes at the community college and her job at the bookstore. She filled me in on everything I'd missed while I was away, and then she got quiet and looked at me with this serious expression. She said she was really proud of how far I'd come since prom night. Back then I was devastated and couldn't see past the hurt and humiliation. Now I was at state building my own life and handling family stuff with actual healthy boundaries, instead of just reacting to everything. I felt my throat get tight because hearing someone acknowledge the work I'd done to get here meant more than I'd expected. I told her I couldn't have gotten through any of it without her and Harold's help. She waved that off and said I was the one who did the hard work of actually changing and growing. We spent the next hour talking about lighter things like campus life and her new boyfriend and plans for next semester. When we left the coffee shop, I felt grateful for having a friend who'd stuck by me through the worst time of my life and still believed in me on the other side of it. Spring semester started with fresh snow on the ground and new classes that felt more focused on my pre-vet track. I'd signed up for organic chemistry and animal behavior, and both were challenging in ways that made me excited to learn. Jessica had moved to a different dorm with some girls she'd met through her sorority, but we still got lunch sometimes and caught up. The pre-vet club started meeting weekly again, and I volunteered to help organize a fundraiser for the local animal shelter. 3 weeks into the semester, I was walking across campus to the library when I saw a flyer for an architecture student showcase. Tyler's major flashed through my mind, and I wondered if he'd have work displayed there. I decided to stop by the student union where the showcase was happening just to see what architecture students actually did. The room was full of detailed models and drawings, and I was looking at a sustainable housing project when I heard someone say my name. I turned around, and Tyler was standing there holding a coffee cup and looking surprised to see me. We both froze for a second, and then I asked if any of these projects were his. He pointed to a model of a community center designed with solar panels and rainwater collection systems. I told him it was really impressive and asked about the design process. He explained his concept and seemed to relax as he talked about something he was passionate about. Then he asked how my classes were going, and I told him about organic chemistry and animal behavior. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about school and our plans for the summer and what we were learning. His voice was friendly, and so was mine. There was no awkwardness or pain in the conversation, just 2 people who used to know each other catching up like normal college students. He mentioned he was doing well and had joined an intramural soccer team. I said I was glad he was settling in and meant it genuinely. When I said I should get to the library, he nodded and said it was good to see me. I said the same thing back and walked away feeling lighter than I had in months. The walk back to my dorm took 15 minutes, and I spent the whole time thinking about how much had changed since that awful night at prom. Mom's choices had destroyed the perfect night I'd imagined and turned my whole world upside down in front of everyone I knew. She'd taken something beautiful and made it into a nightmare that got recorded and shared and talked about for weeks. For a long time, I thought that night had ruined everything, that I'd never be able to move past the hurt and humiliation and loss. But standing in my dorm building lobby, I realized that wasn't actually true. Mom's choices had destroyed one night and one relationship and forced me to deal with family drama I never asked for. They'd made my senior year harder and my transition to college more complicated, but they hadn't destroyed my future. I was still here at state studying to become a veterinarian like I'd always planned. I had good grades and friends and a job lined up for the summer with Dr. Burke. I'd learned how to set boundaries and stand up for myself and choose who got access to my time and energy. I'd survived something that felt impossible to survive and come out stronger on the other side. Tyler and I would probably never be what we almost were that night before everything fell apart. But we'd both healed enough to be kind to each other and wish each other well, which felt like its own kind of victory. Things didn't turn out the way I planned back when I was a high school senior picking out a green dress and dreaming about prom. But I was genuinely okay now, building a life I was proud of and learning that I was strong enough to handle whatever came next. That was something I never thought I'd be able to say, and it felt good to finally mean it. And that's pretty much it. I could probably talk about this all day. If you picked up one useful thing here, mission accomplished.